Welcome, everyone. We're glad you're here. For anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Eric White. I'm the Adult Services Librarian here at the Estes Valley Library. Welcome to the grand finale of our One Book, One Valley 2023 series. Just a little bit about One Book, One Valley for folks who are just joining us for the first time. Every year since 2011, we in the Estes Valley have celebrated community and literacy by coming together in conversation around a single book. This year, that book is Finders Keepers by Craig Childs, a tale of archaeological obsession and an exploration of the ethics around artifacts. I'll introduce Craig momentarily, but first, just a few quick notes about tonight's program. Let's see, we have folks joining us both in person and online. For our in-person audience, we remind you to please silence your phones. Regarding questions, during his talk, Craig will let you know when he's ready for questions. Please hold until then. Heather, our much appreciated volunteer, will supply a microphone for folks to speak into when they do have questions. And finally, we'll be recording the talk for folks who can't make it. For our online audience, you'll be submitting questions through the chat. Feel free to submit those at any time. And if you're experiencing technical issues, please message me in the chat and I'll do my best to help. Finally, two more notes. There will be a book signing after the talk. I'll explain more about that, how that will work at the end. Last but not least, we'd like to remind everyone that the library sees part of its job as bringing in speakers to share their own perspectives for the enrichment of the community. Speakers' perspectives are purely their own. We don't tell them what to say, and we wouldn't want to. That'd just be more work for us and less fun for you. So with that, I'd like to introduce our speaker. He describes himself as a deep traveler of the interstitial places, the cracks in the sidewalk. He is known for following ancient migration routes on foot, pursuing early Pueblo passages across the Southwest, and retracing paths of the first peoples into the Americas during the Ice Age. He's published more than a dozen books of adventure, wilderness, and science. He's won the Orion Book Award and has twice won the Sigurd F. Olson Nature Writing Award, the Galen Rowell Art of Adventure Award, and the Spirit of the West Award for his body of work. His writing has appeared in numerous publications, and the New York Times called him, quote, a modern desert father. He grew up in Arizona and Colorado, son of a mother hooked on outdoor adventure and a dad who liked whiskey, guns, and Thoreau. He has worked as a gas station attendant, wilderness guide, professional musician, beer bottler, and finally, writer. Please welcome Craig Childs.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you all for coming out tonight, being here live in person and wherever the camera is. For those who are not here in body, who are out there in electronic spirit, thanks for being here too. You guys can silence your phones at home as well. It might be helpful, or maybe throw them out the window. Maybe we should all just get rid of all this and run wild into the mountains. I mean, for this moment, let's just stick around and see what happens here. I really appreciate you guys being here, and for this community to choose Finders Keepers. That was a challenging book for me, and I'm glad to see it landing here with all of you, with the community in this valley. And thank you to the library as well. I stopped in there today. You have a beautiful library, which counts for so much. I think that probably the best part of civilization is library. The rest, I mean, I appreciate the sushi and all the rest, but libraries, I think, are on the top of the list. So it's really nice to see a good one here. Before we begin, I'd like to play a little flute. This is a Japanese shakuhachi that I carry around in the backcountry with me, and it happened to be in the truck. So here it is. Thanks. It sounds best inside of a sandstone alcove. In a church, it's not bad, but out in the desert, when you're in a landscape that's full of rock and everything echoes, that's where you want to hear a flute being played. I think that's where everything real happens, that I imagine. It happens out there somewhere, right? And that's why I'm interested in artifacts, objects, human objects that are out there, that are not in here. I'm interested in museums and what we've gathered, but there's something that's so different about finding an arrowhead on the ground and knowing that it washed down a creek or it was left by a hunter, or there's something about it being still in situ, in place. That's a different experience. I'd like you to conjure a scene in your mind, and this, for most of you, this shouldn't be too far away from the front of your memory, because it's a scene that's, I think, burned into the American psyche, and that's Indiana Jones in the first movie. There were others, but that first one, that was really good back then. and he's in a temple. Let's just call him Harrison Ford. Harrison Ford is in a Hollywood temple, standing in front of an ancient golden idol. And he's studying the thing, and he pulls out a bag of sand, and he's measuring the sand in his hand and looking at the weight of the idol until he chooses just the right amount. And then he takes the bag of sand and he holds the idol and he switches them out. And now he's got an idol and a bag of sand is left in the place. And of course what happens next is all the booby traps are triggered, the temple collapses and he barely escapes, people die, the bad guy gets a hold of the object, and that's the story. I think about that moment that Hollywood produced of Harrison Ford looking at that object. And I think so many things could happen right there. Like he could walk away. He could measure it, take pictures of it. So many things could happen, but he replaces it with a bag of sand. And I don't know if I even caught that irony when I first saw the movie, but now when I think back of it, or maybe it's not even irony, maybe this is just the way it works. We replace ancient, fantastic things with bags of sand. And where do they go? Where do they end up? What is the story from there on? Would it be enough to get into this temple and just look at this thing? Just to study it and look all around and see where it is and know its context. Because when something gets removed from its context, it becomes an object. Beautiful, amazing stories to tell, but just an object, missing the temple, missing the jungle, missing the world that it was placed inside of. And that's why I wrote Finders Keepers, because my ethic has always been to leave things where I find them. And I didn't really see this as an ethic. I just saw it as, well, that makes sense. You find an artifact, which I find quite a few because I spend a lot of time walking around in the desert where artifacts last, and you leave it there because it's not just the object itself, it's the canyon around it, it's the wind that's blowing across it, it's the seasons cycling through this place, the sun setting and rising, the moon passing through. All these are the context of that, whatever that is, that arrowhead, that piece of pottery. And I think I probably didn't take things because I knew that if I took an object, I'd lose it. It would end up where? Like, how long would I hold on to this thing? If I found a nice potsherd in Utah, black on white, 1,000 years old, just beautiful, calling my name, I'm not immune from this. When I see a potsherd, it's calling my name and it's saying, "You found me," and I'm going, "Yes, you're mine." And then I go, "Wait a minute, no. You belong to something much older, much bigger." The ethic that I generated around this was just to leave it in place because of that place. Because that is a seed, that is a memory, and that memory is tied to everything around it. And I wrote Finders Keepers to deal with these questions of, well, what do we do with these things? How I've spent time in museums looking through collections, amazing collections, where I remember going into the Peabody Museum and to their pre-Columbian ceramics warehouse, and it has metal grate floors on it, so you can see 3 stories up through the floors, and you're just seeing tens of thousands of pots rising floor by floor around you, and it's amazing, but you're also saying, what's going on here? Why are we doing this? And I spend a lot of time with scientists. I consider myself a science writer, so I understand why we're doing this. There's data, there's information, we learn context, we learn history, but do we need all of this? And so these are the questions that I was wrestling with in Finders Keepers, and my object was to go out and talk to everybody that I could who had some bead on artifacts and what we do with objects of the dead and objects of other cultures, and I set out to just listen, to try to be convinced by everybody's argument. Because I wanted to hear all the arguments, every angle. I wanted to shine every possible light I could on this question of what we do with the objects of the dead. And for instance, I talked to a Libyan dealer who was moving, at the time, $40 million of artifacts every year. And his name is Hisham Abu Tam, and we had a phone interview, and I said, "Convince me of why what you're doing is right." Because he said that in his collection, or the objects he had for sale, he said probably half of them are illegal, but he doesn't know which half, because they've all been laundered so heavily you can't tell the difference between something that's been laundered and something that's been in a private collection for 100 years. And so I said, "Convince me of why this is the right thing to do." Because selling these things ultimately ends up in more graves that are being robbed to get more objects. And especially his focus is Middle Eastern objects, so there's a lot, cradle of civilization kind of stuff. And he said, these things are meant to be seen and appreciated, not buried in a museum's back room. And then how long do museums even last? In private hands, these are investments, and investors take care of these things. And they move them from hand to hand, generation to generation, selling them or holding on to them in families. And these are beautiful, and they're meant to be seen. And he told me about growing up in a family of artifact traders and having artifacts all around him, and how much it affected his life to see this kind of history. And he said, people should be able to touch this, to have contact with this. This should be in the hands of private people who can have experiences with this and who can take care of it. I think I understood what he was saying, because I interviewed the head curator of the National Museum in Iraq, who was there in 2003 during the American invasion of Baghdad, and the museum was looted heavily. He watched it happen. People came in with baseball bats and just knocked through glass, and some people were grabbing whatever they could find, and some people who knew exactly where to go. They had maps and layouts. They knew which rooms held the objects that they wanted. Other people went in and stole objects, took them out and hid them, and waited until things calmed down, waited a few months, and then brought them back to the museum. And he described just the chaos of a museum that he is caring for, full of people carrying bats and smashing objects, and it really brought home to me what Abu Talib said, which is, how long do museums last? These objects are 1,000 years old. Is a museum going to last 1,000 years? Are these things really safe? I didn't come away with answers when I wrote this book. And that was my intention. And my editor was hounding me on this. My editor was saying, you need to come down on one side or another of this issue. And I said, that is the problem. There is not one side or another. There are so many sides, and they all kind of need to be happening at once. So I can't tell you what to do with this. I can't tell you what to do with an artifact. Like I get a lot of messages from people saying, hey, I've got this pot, I don't know how I got it, or my father died and gave it to me, and what should I do with it? And my answers are always unsatisfactory to them. I say, I don't know, go put it in a river. Bury it again, keep it. I don't know. It's yours now. It's your responsibility. It's whatever you want to do with it. It is now in your hands. And I explain that putting in a river is a human tradition. How we take sacred things and get rid of them. We put them underwater. We bury them. We burn them. Or make a case for it and put it in the middle of your house. Or put it under your pillow. I don't know. It's yours now. Some of the answers that I got from people about what to do with these things or how they feel about them were harder to swallow than others. I was talking to an elderly pot hunter in Utah who had spent his life pot hunting, going out with family on Sundays with shovels and digging up sites and it's in some parts of the Southwest this is a tradition, and I get it. I've walked across these sites and looked down and thought, what is down here? The ground under me has skeletons. It has pots and baskets. There's so much down there. I'm curious. And if I had been born into one of these families, I probably would have been a digger, but I wasn't. And I was talking to this man at his home, and we were looking at the objects in his house, and he brought out this beautiful old silver bracelet, Dene style, probably 100 years old, silver and turquoise. And he handed it to me, and I was rotating it around, and he said, it's a beautiful bracelet, right? And I said, yeah. He said, you want to know where I got it? I said, where? He said, off a dead Navajo. And I handed it back to him. What do you say then? You dug into the historic burial of a Dene woman, and you pulled this off of her arm bone? What do you do with that? My object here was to be polite to everybody that I was talking to. I was in their homes. I was in their worlds. I went there to understand where they're coming from, and I don't understand. And he said, this was meant to be seen. This was meant to be worn, not wasted, not left in the ground on somebody's bone. This is meant to travel around the world. And but wait a minute. You're taking something from the dead. there's got to be something wrong with this. And that was why I wrote Finders Keepers, to say, why is there something wrong with removing things from the ground? Because once they're out, then you got a problem. Then you got to decide what you're going to do. Then you got to hold on to it for your whole life. Then you got to give it to your kids if you have kids, and then they've got to carry it on, and they've got to carry it on. What's going to happen to these things? Well, this evening, what I'd like to do is tell you 4 stories that stem from Finders Keepers, and after each story, I want to open it up just to a couple questions. Maybe you've read the book and you have questions that this story brings up, and then I'll go to the next story. I just want to go through a few things that are on my mind from Finders Keepers, stories that really stand out. And the first one I'll call Forrest Fenn's Vault. And maybe you know the name Forrest Fenn. He died just a couple of years ago at the age of 90. And he's the one who hid a treasure chest somewhere in the Rocky Mountains with $1 million worth of gold and artifacts inside of it. And it was found shortly before his death, found in Yellowstone. And he had, I think 5 people died looking for it. Thousands and thousands of people were crawling all over using he wrote a poem as a set of clues to find the thing. And Forrest Fenn is a tricky character. In fact, though he died at the age of 90, he might be watching this from some island somewhere right now, sipping on a cocktail with an umbrella in it and laughing, because Forrest Fenn was a trickster. I didn't spend a lot of time with him, but I met him and spent some time in his house, interviewed him, and I found him to be fascinating. Kind of this, he was in his 80s when we talked. It was 2009, and yeah, he's a trickster character, and he took me through his house, showing me artifacts. His house is a museum. It's in Santa Fe, and he took me back into his vault, where he keeps the really special stuff. And there was this, I think, a 17th century Spanish treasure chest, the one that he hid. So I saw the chest, and it was open on a table with gold just spilling out of it. And he told me his plan. He said, I'm going to go hide this thing, and I'm going to start this treasure hunt. It's going to be great. And I said, I could hide that for you. And I was serious. I didn't want to, I mean, sure, $1 million of gold, whatever. But I said, I know some places where I could put this and they won't find it for 1,000 years. And he said, no, I want this to be found in my lifetime. And the vault was full of artifacts from around the world. And for some reason, he excused himself. I didn't write about this part. I don't think I wrote about it in Finders Keepers, where he said, hey, I have to go do something. I'll be right back. And he left me in his vault. And I didn't really think, I was just like, I don't know, he's a weird guy. He's got lemonade to go drink. I'm just going to check out his vault here. And in hindsight, only recently did I think, oh, you know what? I bet he went to a closed circuit camera and watched me, because there was a lot of gold. Who would miss one piece? And I thought that. I looked at it, I went, wow, there's a lot of gold. Who would miss one piece? But I didn't want to I didn't want to get involved with that kind of thing. That was me. And or that was Forrest. And so what I was really drawn to was on a shelf across from the treasure chest, there was an Olmec jade death mask. This is a Central American, probably 1,500 or 2,000-year-old mask that would be worn on the face of someone who had died. And I'd seen them in photographs, and I'd seen them in museums, but never one that I could just reach out and touch. And I just stood there for a while looking at it going, oh, wow. I mean, it's lost its context. It's lost the burial and the temple and the city that it was in. It's lost the jungle around it, but here it is. And I picked it up and I thought, I could put this on. And then I thought, do not put an Olmec death mask on your face. But I was riveted by the thing. Fine tiles of jade placed around the eyes. The whole thing was made of jade, and it would have fit just perfectly. And I'm sure Fenn was there watching, going, interesting. What's he gonna do next? And I thought this, if it was still on the burial, I wouldn't see it. No one would see it. And that's where I would rather it be. But then how do we know about Olmec culture? How do we know about things that happened thousands of years ago, before cultural memory, or before, back when cultural memory is really hazy? Because I've talked to people, I was interviewing somebody at Hopi not too long ago looking at rock art and saying, what is your interpretation of these panels? And he was identifying certain images, and then he said, no, these are too old over here. These are basket maker age, 1,500 to 2,000 years old. He said, yeah, that's kind of in that murky past that people don't remember. And maybe that's how long cultural memory goes. At about 2,000 years, it starts to fade. So how would we know about these things unless we dug them up, unless we studied them and measured them? And so there I stood with this Olmec death mask, wondering, should this be here? Should this be private? Should this be sold? And Forrest walked back into the vault and saw me and said, you want to put it on? And I said, oh, no, thanks, and put it back down. Forrest Fenn collected so many objects. He bought an entire pueblo in northern New Mexico and excavated it, and was fastidious about the excavation, and had it all, had rooms just full of drawers, and everything was cataloged. But it was obsession. It wasn't necessarily science. But then is science, if he'd been an archaeologist, would have that been okay to gather all this? These are the questions I was struggling with as I was writing this book. Should these things stay in the ground, or should they emerge? I want to open this up to just a few questions before going on to the next story. Maybe something you read in Finders Keepers that Forrest Fenn triggers. Does anybody have a question or a comment? Yes. Oh, wait, there's a microphone.
No. So you said he just recently passed away. I'm just wondering what happened to all of his collection.
I've been wondering that too. But I've actually been kind of staying away from the Forrest Fenn story because I don't think they had children. And that is a question I've been kind of popping out there to some people who've known about Forrest Fenn. But I don't know what happened to it. I can promise you it's not going to a museum. It's probably either back on the market or it's just being kept in the house. So it's a good question. I kind of stayed away after Forrest Fenn's house was then raided 2 weeks later in a federal raid. That was part of a across the whole Four Corners raid, and he got a hold of me soon after and accused me of a lot of things, like telling the feds what was in his house. He, unlike the other people who were raided, he had the money to get it all back. And he was pro about this, so he knew that anything that was taken, he has all the paperwork. He can prove that it's all legal, whether it is or not. So I don't know what happened to it. What'll happen to it in a century? That's what I'm really curious about, is how far does this stuff go? I imagine it's still in Santa Fe. Is there another question? Yeah, she's coming around with a microphone. Thank you, Heather.
Hi. I really like the way you talked about an object taken out of the ground and away from its site as losing the context of, like the mask with has no longer a jungle around it and all that sort of thing. Do you have anything to say about maybe a new kind of context that occurs when such things are put into a museum, where now they're in a kind of conversation with other pieces that are taken also from individual sites? Is there any value to be gained by thinking about if after the fact it's already gone,
Yeah.
and now is there a new kind of context, and what is that context, and what are the values of that context?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a really good question, because that's where a lot of things are. And some things are repatriated, given back to the nearest tribe who has affiliation with them. But there is a powerful context in museums, and I tried to address that in Finders Keepers, especially in the, I wrote about the Peabody Museum, where I was in there with a curator who showed me offerings that were brought in, particularly by Pueblo tribes. They were brought into the collection, and little containers with holes punched in the top, so there can be a spiritual interaction between whatever they put in the container and the mural that had been peeled out of a kiva right next to it. And it was interesting with walking through with her through the collection. We were looking at these mural remnants that had come out of a kiva in New Mexico, and these big pieces of painting from a ceremonial chamber's wall. And we walked into one space that had a few of those laid out, and then next to it was a raven image from the Pacific Northwest. And she was appalled. She said, "Oh, I'm sorry. These should not be together. These should not be sitting on the same table. Somebody must have been in here doing some work." But just seeing how quickly she was going, "Oh, this shouldn't be happening," that gave me the picture of this new context is actually quite sacred, scientifically sacred, a great awareness of where these things came from, and inviting the people, the descendants of the people who made these artifacts, inviting them in to interact with them. I was in the American Museum of Natural History in New York, and I was with a curator going back into the Chaco collection, and they have just aisles and aisles full of closed cabinets with drawers, and as I went back through, I probably went in 3 or 4 times to see the collection over the years, and I said, wow, researchers must be coming in constantly to see this. There's such good material from Chaco. And he said, well, it's pretty much just you. And I'm not a researcher. I'm just there to open drawers and go, whoa! and most curators figure that out pretty quickly. They go, what exactly are we looking for? But this particular curator, he was like, oh, come here, this will blow your mind. Let me show you this. And he'd pull out a drawer, and there'd be from Chaco, a cylindrical basket completely encrusted in like 1,000 pieces of turquoise. And we just marvel at it. And we opened a drawer that had 2 bone awls, polished bone awls with little turquoise and black jet triangles inlaid around them. And they were both inside of foam, just a little foam container, a little set next to each other. And when I saw them, I recognized them from a photograph from the late 1800s when the floor of this room had been excavated, and all these objects were found placed around the center. And I remembered those 2 bone awls. They had been placed like this, in a T shape, which is, if you've read my book, House of Rain, that's the T-shapes across the Southwest are a significant cultural indicator. And when I saw them sitting side by side, I thought, that's not how they were. And I felt like I knew this curator fairly well, but well enough to say, hey, do you mind if I just take those out just for a moment and put them back in their original position? And he went, oh, I see. Yes, go ahead. And it was, it was like, it's another Indiana Jones moment. You put them together and the light comes through the window and but just putting them together, just saying this is how they originally were. And having the curator go, I see the value in that. We should rearrange we should look at the original pictures and cut new foam pads for them and put them how they were. And I think that's a new context that is, maybe it's not emerging, maybe it's been there the whole time. When I go into collections with curators and see, they're wearing their cotton gloves and they are, they have to be careful. You can't break something. That would be terrible. So you have to care for it, and watching them care for it is this new, it's a religion. It's the religion of curation. And I think it has its value. And it has its value scientifically because there are researchers who come in. I know Lori Webster, a textiles expert in the Four Corners. She goes to that museum frequently now and works with these artifacts. So these are there to study. I mean, that's their purpose, is to go in and compare vessels and to find that, there was a researcher who was looking at that collection who discovered on the inside of these ceremonial cylindrical pots, there was residue of chocolate inside. And it was in all of them. And so that's why they collect all these, so that she can come out and go, they put chocolate in these vessels. And then we know something else about that history. The second story is about a seed jar. And if you read Finders Keepers, one of the chapters is about finding a seed jar, which a seed jar has a narrow opening just big enough for your hand. Some of them are smaller. You have to shake them out. But you put, corn seeds or beans into this. And this story has floated around in different forms. I've written it. I've been. I don't know if you've heard the podcast Radio Lab. They did a podcast on this, which is really worth hearing. Molly Webster was the interviewer and editor on it, and a really good podcast. And basically, the long story short is that I was out backpacking with a friend in the desert in southeast Utah, and we were midway up the side of a canyon, and I was hoisting my pack on, and it was pushing my back down so that I could look underneath a boulder, and there was a red seed jar underneath the boulder in perfect condition. A jar with a narrow mouth and paintings of triangles around the mouth. Probably 800 years old, a style called Dead Man's Black on Red. And it had a crack down the front of it and 2 drill holes on either side of the crack. And the holes have been tied together with yucca twine to keep the crack from spreading. And somebody had slipped it under this boulder 800 years ago. And there it still was. And I've found a number of things over the years, baskets, pots, and it is, you walk for 40 days hunting, and then you find it. And it's amazing because you can see the hand that slid it back there. You can see the moment somebody put this pot there. And you can see the original potter who made it. You see there's so much context, and the context is not just the vessel. It's like I was saying, it's the canyon, it's the wind, it's everything around it. And my friend who was with me there, he and I had found a basket, a 1,500-year-old basket. Years earlier, we had found a little probably a 700-year-old clay canteen with loops on it. We have a relationship where we move through the desert together, driving each other into places, and I'm always the one who finds it, and he's always about 3 feet away from me. And I think what that is I'm the one who sticks my head into cracks, and he goes, "Look in that crack, see if there's anything in there." And so this was a big moment for us, finding the seed jar, and then we started arguing about it because he said, "Well, we got to move it." Because you can see a little drip of water that comes in every now and then and lands on the back side of it, and it's starting to erode it and starting to, this thing is coming apart. We need to find a spot that's safer. And I was going, no, we don't move it. It stays right here. It was half buried in sand, so the sand was about up to there. And so I said, no uncovering it, no nothing. I'm the one who found it. And that's kind of the rule we have. Whoever finds it gets to say what happens. And we argued for quite a while. My friend, his name is Dirk. He was a Denver cop for 17 years, a rather intense character. And when he wants something, he is pretty demanding about it. Because I was saying, no, we need to leave it here. And he was going, I don't want to hear any more of your Yoda bullshit. We need to move this thing. It needs to be safer, and you can spot it. Somebody's going to find this. One of us monkeys is going to be out here and is going to find that and is going to take it. And so he started pushing rocks up to hide it, and I was going, no, I can see the rocks. I know what's behind there because I look for those things. I walk around in the desert and I see somebody's stacked up a rock, and I go, what are you hiding back there? Oh, nice little collection of pottery. And in the end, we decided to leave it there, and leave it there untouched. And even with the rocks that Dirk had shoved up, we pulled them out and we left them there on the ground. And that was a story of our moment. And that was where the chapter ended in Finders Keepers, was us leaving the seed jar there. Now I'm going to spoil the rest of the story that Radiolab got, because Radiolab interviewed me at one point, and this seed jar came up, and they said, hey, would you be interested in going back? And we'd send a producer with you to see if it's still there. And we get the whole crew together. My wife at the time, she was 5 months pregnant and camped in the next canyon over. This was 11 years later, so we now had 2 kids, and Dirk came along, and we hooked up with this producer and headed out into the desert, backpacked for 2 days to get to this site. And really do listen to this podcast. It's worth hearing. But I am going to spoil this for you because it was not the ending we were expecting. I mean, the whole family was excited about this. Is it still there? Or has somebody taken it? Is Dirk going to be vindicated and go, see, man, I told you? Or am I going to be saying, it's still there. The world is still sacred. And we climbed up. The producer had never done anything like this, so there was a lot of climbing up cracks, and it's really fun to listen to her panicking on her microphone. And we got up to it was just below a cliff band, and we knew, Dirk and I know these landscapes. We don't use maps. We know where places are. We remember these, and we walked up into it, and things weren't right. We couldn't figure it out. The boulder should have been right here, but there was no boulder there. There were different boulders. Things were wrong, and we were scattering out and looking over and over, and I kept coming back to Dirk, and Dirk going, I don't know what's going on here. The seed jar, it was here, but there was a boulder here, and now it's different. And as we poked around more, we realized that not long after we had been there, the entire cliff had caved in. And we didn't recognize it immediately because it had been caved in for 11 years. So Mormon tea had grown up through the debris, and all the dust had blown away. And we could pinpoint exactly where that boulder had been, and it was obliterated. not only the boulder was gone, but that seed jar underneath it was gone. And I remember when Dirk and I were debating about what to do with it, I had this guttural reaction to just reach out and smash it and just go, that's what's going to happen to it. And it's okay. It's going to turn into potsherds and it's going to float away, which is what happened. A potter named Clint Swink, who does replicas, made this based on a photo of that seed jar. That seed jar, which no longer exists. It's been obliterated. Did I make the right decision? Should we have taken that away? Should we have talked to BLM archaeologists who would go out and determine that the site was at risk, that people would pass through, and it should probably be removed and placed in storage somewhere along with thousands of other objects? What was the right thing to do here? Let me open that up to questions or answers if you have them. Yeah, down here. Heather's going to come down with it. Right down.
The question that I have, and what fascinates me as you're telling the story, is I think about that person that put that pot there, and then they moved on. You know, they moved on to another ancestral Puebloan thing. I mean, this gets into your House of Rain stuff, but
Yeah.
they moved on, and I wonder how they dealt with leaving things behind.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and we have such a sense of ownership ourselves that I think may be different from other people, but I just like your observations about what happens when the people move on and when they're left with the decision of leaving that seed jar.
Yeah, I think a lot about that because these kind of seed jars, you often find them repaired. So they were special. And the analysis of redware seed jars in that area from archaeological excavations are that there is one seed jar per household per generation. So these are actually, you know, there are painted black and white wares that come and go, and there are plenty of kitchenwares, but these seed jars, red seed jars, seem to really hold a place in the family. So I imagine when this was put there, this was my great-great-grandmother gave this to my grandmother, gave this to my, you know, just on. And I guess I think that they put it there thinking, I'm coming back. And there's a lot of sadness that comes from finding something like this, to go, oh, you died or you migrated to some other land and never saw this place again. But then I also think that's thinking of it on just an individual level. On a bigger level, I think about Pueblo people coming back into these places and finding these and going, oh, I know the family line because I know the site near here is a Snake Clan site, and this thing, you know, they know things that I wouldn't know. And by taking it, you're removing an object that might be useful 1,000 years from now. If, you know, I look at these sites and Pueblo people are returning. There are shrines all over out there where you find, you know, there's an 11th century site and there's a shrine with a 15th century pottery in it from 300 miles away from the Hopi Mesas, meaning that they're walking these routes. They've been walking these routes for centuries, even though we look at the Four Corners and go, oh, abandoned cliff dwellings and nobody's here anymore. No, it's all mapped. This is a cultural map. And a seed jar is part of that cultural map. And so even though I feel that sadness of, oh, you never came back, what happened to you? I feel this larger sense of, oh, people could return here someday and know exactly what this is. So I think that the context gets much bigger. Yeah, question down here. What are the seeds that are in? Yeah. Yeah, for planting. You see corn, a lot of corn seeds, corn kernels in. Yeah. Yeah, so a lot of the granaries will have baskets of corn or beans, pumpkin seeds. So you'll just have a jar of. I've seen some sites or seen some photographs of sites where there's a jar of corn, a jar of beans, a jar of pumpkins. So they're just ready to go for.
Aren't that big?
No, but this is probably the really special stuff. And if you go to Hopi now, you go to a grandmother's backyard. There's corn everywhere, and it looks like chaos. And then you start realizing that these are all the blue corns, these are all the yellow corns, these are the mixes. That these are really specific. And so there was probably kept in the seed jar was this is great grandma's blue corn, and over here was a great uncle's orange or yellow corn, and so they were special, and you can only reach in your hand, which I love about these things. Yeah, a question up here. The microphone's coming to you.
Yeah, more an observation. I've done a lot of hiking in the Four Corners, and on one hike we were on a Navajo reservation. The purpose being to get to Rainbow Arch.
Yeah.
And all through the canyons on the way there, you had ancestral pueblo and things that were trashed. The logs had been burned, the structures destroyed, there's some charge around. And then one day, underneath a cliff, there was a rough coil gray pot, maybe about 12 inches, stuck back there. You had to sort of be careful or use a rope to get out to it. And it seems to me that what we touch, we destroy, and if you want to preserve something, you leave it where it is.
Yeah. Yeah, do you think it's still there?
I would think so, yeah. It's probably only visible from across the canyon. You've got really good eyes,
Yeah.
and you have to go a bit to find it. So
Yeah.
I hope it's still there.
I hope so too. I hope so too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and those coiled ones, you
They're
can
rough coils.
and it has the pinches around it.
I don't remember, but you can see the rough coils. And,
Yeah.
And my guess is plus over 1,000 years old.
Yeah. Yeah. And those
Been sitting there undisturbed.
corrugated ones, you can sometimes see
Yep, yep.
thumbprints
Yeah.
in all the little pinches around it.
So I'm leave it behind
Yeah.
guy.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Is there another question or comment out there before the next story? Yeah, down.
Sandals, parts of sandals,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
where did they make them, or is it just one area?
No, they're all over the place. Sandals are pretty common, and you see them in rock art. It's like a footprint, but without toes. And you see sandal prints marching up rocks. And people were wearing sandals all over the place. And they're found in a lot of sites. There's a particular set of sandals that's, it's in this, I think it's in storage at the edge of the Cedars Museum in Blanding, Utah, which is one of the finest little museums, little, so to speak. They've got so much stuff in there, and they've got back in their storage. And you go in and ask Jonathan Till if he'll let you see the sandal. It's these two sandals that are woven out of, I believe, dog bane. It looks like cotton, really fine, and they're loom woven sandals, and they have an intricate design in the soles from top to bottom, so that when you walked, you would have left this pattern. And so different sandals have different patterns, and you could identify who are these people, where did they come from. Their sandal marks would tell you. I mean, most sandals are pretty basic, yucca fiber, but I've seen some nice sandal work out there. Really nice stuff, and just all over. Everybody made sandals. Okay, story number 3. This is, I had wanted this to be a whole chapter in Finders Keepers, but it only got like 2 paragraphs. And it was almost, for me, the most important conversation I had while writing this book. It just didn't fit into the context of, editing. That's what I hate about it. You throw away, 80% of what you've written just to get it down to that final kernel. And this was a phone conversation I had with an aging Zen master in Taiwan, and he's Sheng Yen is his name, and he was revered as probably the wisest of all the Zen masters. He had become a monk at the age of 13. He spent 6 years in solitary retreat, and I don't remember. This was the last interview with him. He died within the year, and I went to him because he had been given the head of a Buddha, of a stone Buddha, as a gift by some of his followers, and it was an expensive gift. And when it was given to him, they said they bought it at an antiquities market, and this is for you to revere the Buddha. And he said, well, if this is a gift, then I'm going to take it back to where it came from. Because he could see that the neck had been cut. He could see the saw marks on the neck. And he brought in experts to look at the head and to determine that it was about 1,000 years old, and they figured out the style and traced it back to a pagoda in China. And indeed, one of the it was, I don't remember the name of the Buddha, but it was called the imperturbable Buddha. And it was, the head had been stolen, and they made a new head and stuck it on top so that nobody would notice. But indeed, it was missing its first head. And so he figured out where it came from, put it on the airplane seat next to him. It was a big deal, flying it back to China, Taiwan, Chinese relations, all that was going on. And he took this back to this celebration where they put the head back on top of the Buddha. While writing Finders Keepers, I got plenty of reasons from people about why to take artifacts. And I could understand a lot of them. Why to take an arrowhead? Well, because it's just washing around, and it could end up anywhere. And this for you is the marker of a moment. And it may be a really important thing in your life. That's why I couldn't come down and say, this is wrong and this is right, because I don't know. It's fine. Take an arrowhead if you need to. Think about leaving it there. But I talked to all these people about, they told me why it was okay to take things. But I was having a harder time finding a deep answer to why do we leave them there. And I thought, if anybody has the answer, it is this Zen master. And we talked over the phone. A Zen nun did the translation, and asking questions back and forth. And when I asked him, why he took this back, the quote, just so I get it right, she said back to me, when Sheng Yen's followers gave this head to him, he thought about people of that time, how they made sculptures to venerate the Buddha, and it made him sad that this head was not with its body. And, I'm a writer, so I'm thinking, oh, yeah, here we go. This is going to be this is the meat. This is what I was looking for in this book. This Zen master is going to tell me why. Why? And I said, okay, it makes you sad. Why does it make you sad? Why should these things be as they are? And the question went back to him, and then it came back to me, and she said, he's just sad. And I went, no, because when you remove something, the wheels that turn in the universe break somewhere. There's some kind of deep fracture that happens in time and spirit, and I need somebody else to say this. I need a Zen master to say this. And I was getting more forceful with my question, going, no, I need to know why it's sad. Why is this sacred? And it just kept coming back to me. he's just sad. That's all it is. And I have to say, I came away from that phone call pretty frustrated because I had worked really hard to make this interview happen. And this was going to be the thing that the whole book rested on. In fact, it was going to be the last chapter, maybe even the last word was Sheng Yen telling me why this matters. But this is Zen. And so after I hung up the phone and just went, oh my God, I didn't get it. And I thought, wait a minute, I did. That's all it is. It's just sad. That if you go down into a temple where there was a golden ancient idol and there is a bag of sand, it's sad. And that's what I carried away from Sheng Yen, was this sadness of things being removed. That maybe it isn't something, because I'm always trying to find some great answer to these questions, and it always ends up being simple. That there's something wrong when these things are missing. There's something wrong when you go through sites and you see where somebody had found a doorstone in the ground and pried it open and pulled out all the juniper bark that was protecting what? You don't know. And it looks like somebody just had a birthday unwrapping and there was just wrapping paper everywhere and the toy is gone. There's something wrong with that. So let me ask you, do you have an answer to my question? This is only the third story. We have one more. Yes, a couple down here. Heather's going to run over and...
Question to your question and answer. Yeah, the first time I was in Grand Gulch in the Cedar Mesa area was around 1990. And we, did a 5-day backpack trip and saw a lot of the sites that were in there. And I was really impressed by how many pottery shards were around, how many pieces of corn there were. And, it was just amazing. We didn't find any, pots, but I wouldn't expect us to there anyway. But the interesting thing was, I've gone back there since, and every time I've gone back, there are fewer pottery shards, fewer pieces of corn. And so regardless of what I do, I'm not going to take anything. But these sites are getting picked over, and and I feel really sad every time I go in there and realize that's what's been happening.
Yeah. Yeah, that's happening across the board. It's Grand Gulch, it's all of Cedar Mesa. There's still places with plenty of potsherds, but I've been watching it too. I've been watching 30 years of deflation, of things going missing. And I know each one is somebody going, oh, this is so important to my moment and everything about this. I'm going to hold on to this forever.
Go back to these sites and put something, the context that you're on, something's missing, and either I'm misremembering things or things that have actually changed since 1990.
Yeah. You're not misremembering. It's happening everywhere. Yeah. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
The first lesson I ever received in Zen studies is that when you have an object that is beautiful, you enjoy it for the moment, and you know that the object is already broken. Like you appreciate the object because time will take care of it at some point. And I just thought your story was so interesting, Craig, because I thought, yeah, they're all already broken. That's the Zen way.
Yeah.
And I know that wasn't the question you were asking, but you raised that thought in me, and I think, not to be cavalier, but that is another way of looking at it for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and also see these potsherds going and kind of go, all right, well, that's next. I think I have to counter the sadness with just going, yep, this is the world we're in, and I understand why this is happening. I understand why I want to take them home. I want to find, I remember when my youngest kid was just a toddler, and we were showing her potsherds and gray wares and corrugated pieces, and then handed her a painted black on white piece. And each one we were able to take back. And I tugged on the black and white, and she tugged back, and I went, no. And we had this moment, and I understood, because she went, ooh, yeah. And then you take it away, and then what happens? Then you have it on your windowsill. Then, I went to somebody's house that somebody had died, and their children were then dealing with the estate. And this person had collected potsherds and other somewhat significant objects. And the carpenter who was working on the house called me and said, "You got to come here, because they're pitching things out the back door." And they were just taking potsherds, and actually a whole ring of a big Oya, the neck of it was just outside. They were going, "I don't know what this stuff is," and throwing it into the yard. And that's when we take something, think, this thing is 1,000 years old. How long is my lifetime? How long are my children going to be around? Are they going to pay attention to this? And then theirs, or then whoever else comes? And that's where I just look at those missing potsherds and I go, you don't have to do this. Because these are actually, even potsherds, they are indicators. I've been with people from Hopi, where we walk into sites and they look at potsherds and they go, "Oh yeah, this had an Eastern orientation. There were people who were coming from over there who lived here for a while." These things would have been known for centuries. 700 years ago, people would have come to the ruins of an earlier site and gone, "Oh, this is not our clan. This is somebody else. We got to move on." This is information on the ground. So the sadness that I get from it is not just that it's missing from my experience, it's missing from the whole experience. Yeah, question down here, and then there's one in the back.
I don't really have questions, I have a comment. One is that with the unbelievably immense stores of all kinds of artifacts that are maintained within universities and museums and everything, curated, nobody ever sees. And I understand the value of being able to study that, but that is lost to all of us that gain inspiration and revel in the majesty of this thing. It is so gorgeous.
Yeah.
Look at that. The other thing is that when the pottery shards and everything are left at a location, it gives life. When you walk in there, instead of it just being a hollow shell, you feel the life, and that's the sad thing to have that gone too.
Yeah.
Even as a casual visitor.
Yeah. Well, in defense of museums, they can't put everything out. They put out, 5%, 10% sometimes of what they've got. And they just can't. And I get it. They're saying, here are the best pieces we've got, or here's a special exhibition. But if we showed it all to you, you'd walk in and go, "Oh God, that's too much." and they have it in collection for researchers to be coming in, and papers are coming out of it, and so there's data coming out, but we don't have the experience of it. We get what's up front. And I get, I've talked to plenty of curators who said, "I'd love for everybody to see all this, but I can't even see all of it. It's back here in boxes and bins, and so we specialize. We give you what we can." But then there's plenty. That's where I'm going, okay, that's good. We don't need more. There was a question, a Zoom question.
Yeah, one of our online friends asks, is there evidence of grave digging around the world before colonialism? Were any cultures digging for their own valuables, or is the exotic the basis or demand Or is
Yeah.
the exotic the basis or demand of collecting and trading artifacts?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And yes, there's plenty of sign of grave digging that happened before. In fact, Egypt is a really good example. One of the reasons that people were buried so deeply inside of pyramids or at different sites is to keep them out of the hands of people who would come and tear them open, because they knew they would come. And sometimes sites were opened up and desecrated within years in Egypt of them being laid in their tombs. So it's been happening for a while. And it's not just, I mean, I have an example, but it's still a colonial example. I wrote a little bit in Finders Keepers about St. Lawrence Island in the Bering Sea, and spending some time with Siberian Yupiks who live on the island in the village of Savunga, and they have their older villages that have been abandoned. You know, there's one that's probably 5 miles from this village that is maybe 800 years old, and I went out with a digger, with a Siberian Yupik, and went out to his dig spot, and he goes into this ancient village of his own people, his own ancestry, and digs up artifacts. And they can do this legally there because even though it's U.S. territory, which the Antiquities Act would cover that, it's a private island. It's a native corporation island. So you can legally, if you're native to that island, you can take the artifacts. And so I talked to him about this, where he said, "This is, my ancestors left these artifacts for us, for the cash economy, and we find them and we sell them." And I walked around this site, and he said, "These are my dig parameters. Here's another family's. Here's another. You know, this is a hunting site, and this is a hunting and gathering culture. They are hunters up there, and he just considered this another form of hunting. That this was finding cash in the ground, and you find spectacular artifacts and sell them for quite a bit, And for him, he just said, this is part of my lineage. But then back in the village, an older man said that, why we have so many problems in this village is because we have so many holes out there that we keep digging. And it's digging those holes that is letting loose evil, that is letting loose badness. And we shouldn't be doing that. So even that still is colonial, because he's coming out and selling them on a capitalistic market, but it is still this has been happening for a long time. It isn't new. It's the scale of it is new. The ability we have to dig, the numbers of us digging, that is all new. The last story I want to tell you tonight is it's a rainy day in the desert in Utah, sandstone desert. And there's a tarp set up over a series of deep trenches. And in the bottom of one of the trenches is a Hopi elder with a feather and with pinches of cornmeal. And he's performing a ceremony as objects are being brought to these trenches, as pots are being brought, and skeletons being returned to the ground. They were dug up 60 years ago from this site, and they've been in a museum, and now they're going back into the ground. Women are walking boxes out, and in Hopi tradition, women aren't supposed to go down into the underworld, so they stay up on top. They're the carriers. So it's kind of it's this interesting, this ceremony that's going on of women carrying boxes, these cardboard boxes that are then opened up, and then men come and take the material out and give it to the Hopi priest. And the Hopi priest is speaking in Hopi and saying prayers, but this isn't a traditional ceremony. It's one that he's making up on the spot because there is no ceremony for returning these things to the ground. These were brought back from the museum. People were working on this for years to get these things repatriated. 44 human skeletons were going back into the ground with all the objects they had been buried with. Brought down and handed to the Hopi elder, who would place them and say a prayer. And the skulls would be filled with sand, and the big pots would be filled with sand. So when the whole thing is buried, they won't crush. 44 human skeletons going back in. A mother who was buried with a child. Men, women, children. These beautiful painted vessels seated down while it was raining. You can hear the raindrops on the tarp. And then when everything is done, wheelbarrows come out, shovels come out, shovel loads go in, covering the skulls, covering the pots. And this soil has been sifted. It's been put through a screen, so it's really fine. It's like silk. So you're pouring in this silk sand and covering all these objects, hundreds and hundreds of artifacts placed in the ground. And then the trenches are all filled up, and the ground is flattened out. And the Hopi man starts a little fire with pinyon to smudge us, to smudge the shovels and the wheelbarrows. All the tools that were used are carried through the smoke to close this off, to say, done. These have been returned. They're back in the ground now. And I like to think that some healing is happening, that we're putting things back the way they were, the best that we can. And what's really striking here is that the museum, you'd expect the museum just to send boxes full of artifacts and they're jumbled together, but no, you open the boxes and everything is inside of linen sacks with linen ties on them. Everything is neatly arranged. And you can see the love that went into this from the museum, from taking it off the shelf and sliding them into their sacks and tying them off. The bones, each individual with their own linen sacks. And you realize that a ceremony is being created here. And this is the context we were talking about, the new context of returning. That the museum came up with this ceremony, and then the elder down in the trench came up with his ceremony. And in the end, you blow smoke across it all. And you say, done. You say, this place is healed. Maybe there'll always be scars. Maybe it'll never heal entirely. But at least these are back in the ground. And that's what I think should happen to so much of this, is that it just go back. Close those holes off. The one that the old Yupik, Siberian Yupik in Savunga said, these holes are killing us. Fill the holes again. Close this place off. Blow smoke across it. And be done. That's the fourth story. So now, any questions? Yeah, down here. Will you come down in the front with the microphone? Thank you, Heather.
I just wondered, do they secure that area somehow so that more people won't come and try to take those things again? Or
Other than the
that...
people who are there, I don't think anybody knows where it is.
Oh, that's good.
And it's buried pretty deep.
Yeah.
You'd have to get serious. And I don't know how it is from one repatriation to another. I'm starting to study repatriation more now and talking to people about it and what the process is from the museum to the ground and what it means culturally and how, there are a lot of people, like at Hopi, he said, I don't really want to be doing this, but nobody else is going to do it.
Right.
But it needs to be done. And so I'm interested in this process of return, but also these are anonymous. I don't know where else they're happening. They're out in the world and they're being covered up, and not a lot of people who would know where they are.
That's a good thing. I just kind of wondered if you ever anticipate a time where all these things will be gone, because just in the book it seemed like so many things were being taken, and I don't know if it's still as bad or if it's getting better.
I don't think it's getting much better. I think it's getting better over longer periods, but some places are still really heavily hit. Central America, Middle East, South America, the American Southwest, any place where there are artifacts.
Yeah, well, I appreciated you also talking about it worldwide, because, we think of our area, but it is a worldwide thing.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you.
thank you.
So my question has to do with photography, because you don't mention that in the book, and you haven't said anything about it this evening. And so my question is, before they put these objects back in the ground, did they photograph them so that future people can see what these artifacts looked like?
That is a really good question. I don't know. Yeah, that's a good question, because every museum handles different things differently. Some things are very well recorded, and you can go to a file and see the picture and the measurements. And some things are just boxes and boxes of stuff. So I don't know. I'll get that answer. That's a really good question. There's a question in the back, and another one from that side.
Well, thanks for taking my question. My favorite chapter was chapter 9 in your book about the salvage archaeology.
Yeah.
And the one woman, Pam, that did her work.
Yeah.
And I just thought the whole piece of just about the respect. And it makes me wonder too, like there's obviously pre-Columbian peoples and who knows before that. We're living on this planet and we're crossing paths. I just wonder just what your thoughts and things that really resonate with you in that respect of the salvage archaeology.
Yeah, the salvage archaeology is, that to me was the ultimate of anybody taking things. I went, okay, they make the most sense. And the salvage archaeologists are just the ones they're sent in as highways are being dug or as foundations are going in. And if there's a site there, they remove the objects and repatriate them or do whatever. But they're kind of they're called shovel bums. They're the on the ground diggers. And I really respect what they have to do. Because it's almost the opposite of what the Hopi elder is doing, where he's having to come up with a ceremony for putting them in. And the chapter you mentioned, I'll just briefly say what happened there is it was a excavation of a parking lot in downtown Tempe, Phoenix basically, and they found, I don't remember, 20-some burials under the parking lot, Hohokam, 1,000-year-old, with pots and everything. And there was one woman who was in charge of all the bodies. Other people were in charge of different artifacts, but when they found a body, they gave it to her, and she had to figure it out. And as we were talking about it, she was sitting on the tailgate of a truck smoking a cigarette, and I said, "So why you? Do you have a specialty, forensics?" And the dig boss she didn't really want to answer me, but I'm a journalist. I got to get my answer. And the dig boss was saying, tell him why. And she kept dodging the question. And he said, come on, just tell him why. And she pulled out her cigarette and she said, because I cry the whole time. And then she put out her cigarette and walked away. And that struck me so much, because it's like, oh yeah, that's why they give the job to you. Because you sit in this trench and you weep as you're digging. And all the scientists said, that scientist is the one who should be doing this, because she has this reaction to it. So thanks for bringing that chapter up. There's a question from out in the electrosphere.
Yeah, so this is kind of an amalgamation of a few questions, so bear with me. You mentioned in the book that there's no single answer to the question of what should be done with artifacts, and we can talk in the abstract about the removal of artifacts being sad and preserving context, but we're talking about indigenous artifacts, and descendant communities have strong personal, moral, and spiritual claims on objects their ancestors made, objects from their own cultures. How would you respond to the argument that those claims should come first before those of archaeologists, curators, and collectors? And do you wish you'd included more indigenous voices in your book?
Good question. I think that should, well, at least in the landscape of that indigenous group, that should be they should have the first say over what happens to this, which is often with these salvage archaeology projects, that is often how it works. They have a significant say. And the salvage archaeologists are just the ones who are doing the groundwork on it. And so, like, for instance, the site in Tempe, as far as I know, all that material went back to tribes. But then I've talked to people from different tribes who are just going, don't want it, don't want to deal with this stuff. It's been harmed. It's been so there isn't a monolithic indigenous response to this, I think, any more than there is a monolithic anybody's response to what to do with it. Do I wish that I had included more voices in it? Indigenous voices. Writing indigenous voices is really tricky. And House of Rain, when I wrote that, I avoided it. I said, you know what, I'm not a mouthpiece. I'm gonna mess this up. I'm gonna talk about archaeology and science and my own experience. And it's taken a while it's taken me 30 years to where I feel like I can include indigenous voices that I know enough not to make as many mistakes as I would have made 10 years ago writing about it. Because it's very tricky to write something and then it needs to be, what I write then needs to be seen by many different people. And you don't just walk around Hopi going, anybody want to read my paper? A book that I had come out last spring is called Tracing Time, and it's about rock art on the Colorado Plateau. And that's the book where I stepped out and said, okay, now I think I know enough that I can start bringing indigenous voices into this without making a mistake. Because I spent enough time at Hopi making mistakes, or on the Navajo reservation talking to Dene people and going, so I'm trying to understand this, and they're going, you're just not getting it. And so I've been making mistakes for decades. And Tracing Time was the first time that I felt like I can interview somebody, and I understand, I have a long way to go, but I understand what I shouldn't write and what I should write, and what is culturally polite from Hopi and what is culturally polite from me, and where we meet. And because often people will say things and I'll go, I'm not supposed to write that down, but you're too polite to tell me not to, because I'm coming from a different culture where my culture goes, hey, don't write that down, this is off the record, right? And so it's taken me a while to figure that out, and I am nowhere near, but I'm farther than I was before. And I feel like after 30 years of writing about this, I've started to bring in indigenous voices in a way that I feel that can fit into the narrative I'm writing without me using them necessarily. It's tough as a writer, as a white writer, to be walking around in this landscape and say, okay, I'm writing about ancestry that's not mine, but it is here, and it is part of my life. And so for Tracing Time, I spent a lot of time with folks from Zuni and Hopi and Dene, Ute, not necessarily saying, what does this mean, but how do you relate to this? And one of the things that came to me from Jim and Node, who's Zuni, said, we were talking about rock art, and he said, when I see this, I see identity. I see my family. And when you look at it, you see exotic, some ancient thing, mysterious past. And he said, but I see my own family, and I see my people. And this isn't necessarily exotic. This is something that's alive, that I'm interacting with. And so I'm slowly bringing that voice in where it seems appropriate, but it's a delicate walk, because we are surrounded by a lot of ancestry. This is native land, all of this. And I look at rock art and I see it as, these are the oldest claims on the land. If you go back through all the deeds and all the signatures, these are the first. And that's who this belongs to. And I think it's really changing. I think museums, archaeologists, and I know quite a few indigenous archaeologists. So there's a lot of flow right now. I think that this is a powerful time. I think there's a lot opening right now, which I feel that in my small way I'm part of it by being able to open up this last book, Tracing Time, and deal with this more clearly. There are a couple more questions over here.
Thank you for this evening. It's been quite wonderful, but
You're welcome.
and I'm almost hesitant to ask this because my experience is well over 40 years old, and I had 2 summer digs in Jordan. And my father was a professional archaeologist in Jordan for most of his life. And my experience there then was that we were required to keep meticulous records of location, of what the situation was where the object or the item was found. It was photographed if it was, worthy of photographing, and the organization that oversaw the dig had given permission along with the Jordanian Department of Antiquities, was that we would treat this as valuable, as much as we possibly could. And the idea being that with the records, you could reconstruct what you had dug through.
Yeah.
And so my question kind of is, what's your attitude about archaeology?
That's a good question. I spend a lot of time with archaeologists, and I've dug with them, and I believe in what they're doing. I think it should be done with a lot of questions. The data that comes out of the ground is amazing. What you can reassemble from the past. I see this going across indigenous boundaries too, that indigenous people who aren't archaeologists are interacting with archaeologists and saying, okay, well, what did you find here? So there's a lot of exchange actually happening, more and more exchange. So I actually believe in archaeology. I feel torn about it because I want to say, stop, that's enough. But then you've got a really good question about this site. And if you answer it, that would really change how we see this whole picture, and it would add to, a long-term understanding, and an understanding that could still be here in 1,000 years because of what we find now. So that's why this book was hard for me to write. When every other book of mine has shown up, the first box of them, I open them up and go, yay, look, it's a book, my name's on the cover. This book showed up, and I remember looking down at the box on the ground and going, oh no, it's real now. So I don't know. One more question was, yeah.
I just wanted to ask, so you were talking about the parking lot and the scavenger digs to kind of save everything before it all kind of gets, destroyed or covered up. A little less abstract, but who pays for these things? Would it be the tribes interested? Is it kind of done as a charity or the researchers?
No, it's the developer. Whoever is digging that site, or whoever is putting in this case, the transportation center, they hit this site and they knew that, oh, there goes a lot of money. So it's also the state. So there are state archaeological offices that are part of this, and so somebody hires this team to do the excavation, and all the construction stops. So there's a lot of money that goes into this from the developer, and I've also talked to archaeologists who say there's a lot of pressure sometimes of people with backhoes just going, get this done, and we don't have the money to pay you to be down here. So they there are some things that are slipped over, but they're doing their damnedest. And
Reasons, then?
Yeah.
Or there's laws that are enforced?
It is illegal to dig to ruin this site. But my question to those archaeologists, the salvage archaeologists, I said, well, why don't you just dig this another 20 feet down and put all this down there so it's still here? And they all looked at me and just went, you're strange. But that's how I think about it. That just, why not leave it in its place? Why not keep it there? Because there is something powerful about that. Well, thank you all for coming tonight and listening through this. Thank you. Thank you. And Eric has something to add, and then I'll be out to sign books and bye Zoom people wherever you are. So I'll be out there if you have any more questions, I'll be around.
All right. Thank you again, Craig.
Yeah.
So some very quick thank yous and next steps. Thank you all for coming, both our in-person and online friends. Heather Hines, thank you for helping with tonight's event and throughout this series. Thanks for doing a hard job and letting me boss you around for a couple hours. Thank you to the Presbyterian Community Church of the Rockies for letting us gather here and supporting us. In particular, thanks to Meredith Ishida for all of her help with the details and logistics. Thank you to Jim Nussbaumer, our AV person for this evening, for his help. People have seen me screw up the AV before, so I was really happy to have help this time. Thank you to Pastor Chris Davis for giving us the green light. Thank you to the One Book, One Valley Committee and library staff for all their help and guidance on my first ever community read. Thank you to the Estes Valley Friends and Foundation for helping to make this event possible. And thank you to all of our series presenters and everyone who talked to me or provided guidance in the process of creating this programming. We're almost done. We're getting there. Finally, thank you to our Estes Valley community for choosing this book, joining us for programming, sharing your thoughts, and supporting the library. So let me tell you what's going to happen next. We're going to have a book signing across the way in Fellowship Hall, across the atrium over there. So as soon as we're done here, we'll invite you to join us there. We'll have 2 tables at the far side of the room. At one table will be our partner, McDonald Bookshop, who will be selling copies of Craig's books. At the other table, Craig will be signing books and book plates. If you've purchased a copy of the book for yourself, he can sign that. If you still have a copy of the book that you received from the library, please don't present that to get signed. We need to get those books back so that we can take them out of circulation and give them away like we did last year, but hopefully faster. And yeah, thanks for all your patience while I explained all that. Have a great night, everyone, and we'll see you across the hall.